Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Good evening, everybody. Now that anxious minute while I wait a second to see if all of the buttons are working. Hey, Gene. Hey, Chris. Hello, no one on YouTube. Hey, Carolyn. Hello all around. Hey, Becky. Hey, Jill. Hey, Christina and Octavio.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid
clarinet and even more torrid band. Hey, Evelyn, Becky, Bart, Gregory, Katie, and Shares. Sherry. Hey, Gary. Hey, Octavio, Ramona. Evening all around. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Christy. Congrats, Adam. I get my Pfizer number 2 in a week. That's why we're doing the ghost tour next week. I can do that one in any condition. Just about. Hey, Steve. Hey, Wendy and Paula and Dory and Tracy and Kay. Hey, Emily and Susan. Kay? Tracy? Thing bounces in so out of order on this app. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Ellen. Everything's reasonably okay here. Hey, Miguel and Christy and Bridget. Hey, Martin. Hey, Georgia and Amy and Teresa. I'm missing a few here. Hey, Mark on YouTube. Hey, Ellen and Carol. Thanks. No one on YouTube. Hey, Amy. Hey, Denise. Hey, Laurel. Tracy and Jacqueline. Julianne. Jean. Hey, Dina. Hey to all the Mysterians out there. Hey, Wexley. Hey, Elizabeth. Hey, Joanne. You know, I am kind of ready. Well, I don't really get weekends, so I can't really say I'm ready for it. Hey, Randall. Hey, Lyndall. Lydia. Joanne, Maureen, and Patty, and Ann and James and Deb. Welcome along, everybody. Glad to have you all here. Hey, Debbie. Hey, Mary and Jolynn. Hey, Ann. Hey, Bob. Welcome, Sarah. Hey, Jennifer. Hey, Bruce. Hey, Marcy and Bridget. Hey, Kathy. Good evening all around. Miles was right here a minute ago. Hey, Santiago and Catherine, Lynn. Hey, Timothy. Hey, Jay. Hey, Ann. Hey, Maria. Hey, Alexandra. Hey, Kelly. I should have stretched before this. Hey, Tallulah. Hey, Rodney. Hey, Don. Hey, Alex. And good evening all around. The Spring Street Church Graveyard. I'm not sure if I know that one. I get my second shot a week from today. Hence the fact that I listed a ghost tour for that night. Hey, out there in Braidwood. Welcome back. Stephanie, I'm by the end of the night, I will surely bring out Miles or Charlotte. Most likely Miles. But we haven't yet gone a night without Miles making an appearance. And I am drinking Jepson Single Barrel Bourbon. Hey, Amni and Lisa. Hey, Napur in St. Louis. Yeah, sure is. Oh, man, that's rough. H.H. Holmes didn't really like cereal. That makes sense. Hey, Ramona. Hey, Grandma Belle. Hey, Sue and Cindy. Hey, TJ. Well, I just got an email from Graceland Cemetery a couple of hours ago saying they're going to be open for small group tours starting next month. Tracy Miles is the cat, as seen in the logo over here. Hey, Amy. Hey, Sue. Hey, Jamie. Hey, Linda. Hey, Sarah. Hey, John. Hey, James in Salt Lake City. So I'm already working on. I still gotta finish up some licensing stuff with the city before I go back to doing live tours. But hopefully by early summer we'll probably get started. And small group stuff too, so it might be a little bit rough for a bit. I've already locked in my October dates anyway. It's a little smaller than I used to have. What I'll probably do is announce it first to that tier on the Patreon and give them the first shot before I actually list them. But that's alright, it was like he shared it someplace. Sarah, I can't do in-person ones yet. They're not allowing them just yet. Any tips is take the first right, that'll take you right to eternal silence. Adam, we'll probably do some of that stuff. October 3rd. I hope to be able to join you at least for some of October 3rd for the cemetery cleanup. I'm still figuring everything out. Weekends in October tends to be, it's the busy season for me, you know? Hey, Susie. Hey, Gina. Ramona, you don't have to be licensed to be a tour guide in this city, but you do need a business license if you own the tour company. Hey, Zap. Hey, Carolina. Hey, Cindy. Now, in New York, you need a license. But it's a good thing I've got my New York license. So yeah, Ali, I'm hoping I'll start doing live ones this summer. I hope. Still got to deal with some paperwork stuff. Hey, Rita in South Bend. Hey, Lori. Hey, Karen. Hey, Aviva and Lisa. Thanks, Laura. I always try to look my best for these things. I even gave myself a haircut. I still haven't had a haircut in over a year now. But I trim it myself every now and then. The back probably looks horrible. But... Hey, Linda. Hey, Lauren. Hey, VK over on Twitch. Hey, Dan. Hey, Geraldine. Evening, Carrie in Fort Wayne. Hey, Michelle. Hey, Dirk. Hey, Luann. Hey, Santiago. Hey, Paula. Hey, Nicole. Hey, Jackie. Can Ronnie trim my hair? Not any better than I can do it myself. Hey, Kristen. Yeah, I have started looking at places to get my hair cut afterwards. I was going to, wait the whole rest of the next couple of weeks and get a haircut immediately after, but it was getting kind of unmanageable. It was getting like that Ronald McDonald hair helmet. Evening, Mary. This is Benny Goodman live at the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. People like to say we can trace H.H. Holmes to that hotel, but I know exactly who made that up and when. I can trace him to a lot of places right nearby there, but not that actual place. Evening, Geraldine in Connecticut. Hey, Sandra in Spokane.
And they all loved it. They all loved those passages.
Hey, Paula.
By Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein. Rosetta.
Hey, Jackie. Bilk Ferengi, glad some greetings to you. Hey, Catherine Jane. Yeah, still, you can't really tell that I've still kind of got the quarantine mullet going here. Ah, thanks, Christine. Welcome along, everybody. Hey, Robert in Hyde Park. We'll give it to the end of this Benny Goodman tune before we get started properly. I just used a little scissors and cut mine in the mirror. This worked out okay. I've actually been pretty pleasantly surprised with how well I've been able to cut my own hair. Philk Ferengi is over on Twitch, I believe. Hey, Zap. Lynn, yeah, I do plan to keep on doing virtual tours. It's, I may not do them at quite the same rate that I do, like daily ones every day, plus another one on Thursday. Might tone back the frequency a little bit. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Bridget. But I do intend to keep on doing them for a while, yeah. As long as people keep watching them, I'll keep doing them. As long as people keep tipping. Hey, Dana. Dana, if you didn't get a notification, that's going to be somewhere in your Facebook settings. I don't activate anything to make the notifications come up. Hey, Ann. Hey, Catherine. Kathy, glad to hear it. Evening, Sarah. Evening, everybody. If you're on Twitch or YouTube wondering where I'm talking to all of these people, it's most of the action is over on Facebook Live. Yeah, Bob. I ran into Bob at Graceland. Hey, Kara. Hey, Danero. Linda, Aiden is at at his dad's place. He's my stepson. He does kind of look like me. It's weird. But good news for him, he has picked his college. But we just run out of that Benny Goodman track. I gotta hit pause and go ahead and get started properly. You know, I have had this wrong thing up. It was supposed to be like this for the last several minutes. Sorry about that. Well, that's real professional on my part, but all right. I think it's time we go ahead and get started, everybody. Welcome along. So I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including but not limited to Mysterious Chicago, the book, Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, a series of young adult novels, including I Kissed a Zombie and I Liked It, timeless classic. And most relevant for tonight, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. This is a massive biography of Holmes that I did a few years ago. I tried, after years and years of researching the guy, just trying to fill in stuff for the tours, I ended up with an awful lot of data on the guy and trying to trace not only what really happened, but also the way the legend grew. I started getting interested in Holmes really for the strictly mercenary purpose that I was working for a ghost tour company that wanted to do Devil in the White City tours. And I loved the book, but it all kind of took place in the same couple of locations. I figured there's not really enough for me to do a really good tour here. I got to find out some more about this guy. So I started going into the research rooms and the microfilm rooms and the legal archives. But eventually I came up with enough to have this book here. And just recently it got me written into a conspiracy theory. This guy believes that serial killers do not exist. They were invented by feminists to make people afraid of men. So Seltzer basically denies that Holmes was a serial killer in the popular sense of the term. This is true. That is, he didn't kill for abnormal psychological gratification, but merely out of the practical necessity of protecting his fraudulent business interests. That's true. But even Seltzer is misdirecting here, since he never questions whether Holmes killed anyone in the first place. Seltzer was planted to get you closer to the truth while reinforcing the overall lie. It's true. I wasn't planted by the people you would expect. It wasn't like any of the big major players in conspiracy theories. It was Mayor McCheese. I've been working for Mayor McCheese this whole entire time. Seltzer's biography shows he's never written anything like the Holmes biography. That's not true. I had written several Chicago history books. He started out writing young adult fiction. In 2010, he published a paranormal romance titled I Kissed a Zombie and I Liked It. It's hard to take this guy seriously, and that's part of the ruse. Well, you read the rest of his crap, it's all like anti-vax shit, and a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of that too. But I've ended up talking about Holmes on TV and the radio many, many times over the years, perhaps most famously on half of the episodes of American Ripper on the History Channel, which looked into the story that H.H. Holmes could have also been Jack the Ripper. I showed them plenty of paperwork showing he was in Chicago during the Ripper murders, but they had 8 episodes to fill. So, I'll give a very basic recap of the H.H. Holmes story. March 31st of 1893 came this article in the Chicago Tribune, Hid in Secret Rooms, where dealers discover their missing furniture. This guy by the name of H.H. Holmes was operating a building down on the south side. It had been, first floor was retail, second floor was apartments. Now, in advance of the upcoming World's Fair in Chicago, he had added a third floor onto it that he said was going to be a hotel for the World's Fair. But then he had gone around and bought all kinds of furniture, all kinds of bedding, crockery, everything you would need to furnish a hotel. He bought all of this stuff on credit and then didn't pay for it. Instead, he would hide it in secret hidden rooms all over this third floor that he had added until he could sell it for cash. Eventually, this was about 6 weeks before the fair opened, he got caught. So this is what the building looked like. We came to know it as the Holmes Castle, and later it became known as the Murder Castle. But it was about a year and a half after this. The place was never really open for business or anything. The whole thing was just a swindling operation. He tried to set fire to it for the insurance money right in the middle of the fair. But about a year after that, he went to Philadelphia with his friend and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fake your death. Instead, he killed him. But when the insurance company put 2 and 2 together, Holmes was arrested for trying to swindle the insurance company. At the time, they thought he was just a swindler, and some people remembered, hey, didn't he have this building back in Chicago that was supposed to be full of secret passages? Don't you think we ought to investigate that? And then they thought, nah, and just forgot all about it until they found the bodies of 2 of Mr. Peitzel, his friend's children, buried in a cellar in Toronto. At that point, it became clear that this guy was not just a swindler, he was also a murderer. And they spent a few weeks digging up that building and saying things like, it was kind of a matter of the police saying, we found a rope, perhaps he was hanging people, or we found a bench, maybe this was the dissection table. So, after the whole thing had died down in Chicago, really, there was an article in the New York World called Hidden Secret Rooms, which gave this diagram that still gets reprinted, where rooms had names like the dark room, the secret room, the sealed room, the room of the 3 corpses, the hanging secret chamber, the dark room, the asphyxiation chamber, the death shaft, the maze. Now, some of these were real places. Hanging chamber was not for hanging people, it was hanging in between the first and the second floor and would have been a little bit further down the footprint than this, really. Some of this came from real stuff, others was just out of their imagination, and from there the legend grew and grew and grew. So, some of this was apparent that it was a lot of urban legends when I first started just going through the newspaper archives. And there's a number, more and more papers have been digitized now, but there's still a lot of the best ones are still only on the microfilm room. Here's one from late July of 1895 when the police had been digging through the place, and after that they hadn't really found anything, and the newspapers who had been going along for the ride started saying, you know, maybe the police have just blown this all completely out of proportion. But there's also at the legal archives. The legal archives, if you go there, there's all the paperwork from all the old lawsuits. Like you can see on this microfilm reel, you can see here Holmes is being sued by Frederick Schultz. That was a mattress provider. E. Smith was an investor. French and Potter was a crockery company. And these are just the ones under his own name from that reel. Usually he had somebody else's name on top of the paperwork. So from what I was able to find, there were 60 lawsuits while he was in Chicago. Usually for buying stuff on credit and not paying for it. And what you do is you write down these case numbers at the archives, and a few weeks later they get it out of the off-site storage, and they bring you back all the paperwork. And sometimes it's just one envelope with a couple of summonses, and other times it's these boxes and boxes full of crumbling Victorian legalese. Stuff like these. Sometimes they're literally pinned together because they're from before paper clips. The rubber bands are a more modern addition. And sometimes there'll be things like impossible to read lawsuits about him stealing stuff to start a barber shop in his building. Or you'll find things like the architect's original diagram for the first floor front of the building that we now call the murder castle, which actually helped to establish exactly what the dimensions of this thing were. But things eventually started getting retold, especially in the book Gangs of Chicago by Herbert Asbury, which was originally published under the name Gem of the Prairie. This is the story that set up what most people think of when they think of Holmes, the guy who ran a hotel where he was preying on women who came to town for the World's Fair. Now, some of this he got out of old tabloids, some of it he just made up, but for several decades, that one treatment was really all the information most people could possibly find about Holmes, unless they were digging around in old archives. But let's go ahead and cover the H.H. Holmes' life and career. This is his boyhood home in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, which is actually still standing, strangely enough. Most of what we know from his childhood comes from a couple of sources. A few of his neighbors reminisced about what he was like as a kid. There were stories that he kept mostly to himself. He did write an autobiography called Holmes' Old Story. He was born here under the name Herman W. Mudgett. This is an autobiography that came out in the middle of the case. It's difficult to know exactly how seriously to take it. There's strong evidence that a lot of it was really punched up by the publisher, partly because his own writings that we know of were not very good, not particularly catchy, but we do know that he studied medicine. He studied under a doctor named Dr. Nahum White here in New Hampshire, who was a known advocate of human dissection. So, when he was 17, he married a woman named Clara Lovering. They had a son named Robert. Clara and Robert followed him when he went out to Ann Arbor to attend medical school at the University of Michigan. But they left before he graduated. Neighbors said that they would see Clara walking around with black eyes, and she eventually just took off. Only saw him again a couple more times after that. Professors said that he was a pretty bad student. The other students gave him the nickname of Old Smegma. And a couple of the professors even said that they only really graduated him out of pity, which is just what you want to hear when a guy's about to operate on you. He didn't really practice much as a doctor. After graduating, he practiced in upstate New York very briefly, bummed around the Midwest where he met a woman named Myrta Zutik Belknap. He was still technically married to Clara. When in Chicago, he tried to take out a divorce warrant on her, saying that she was the one who was doing the cheating, even naming names, but nothing ever really came of it, and he was still married to Clara when he became married to Myrta here in Chicago. Now, with Myrta, he had a daughter named Lucy. Now, there's only one photograph that I know of Myrta. It's from much later in life. That's her on the left. That's about as good as the scan gets. Later on in life, she became a principal of rural route schools around Minnesota. But he also built for her a house in Wilmette that still stood up until the 1990s, even though it was officially not owned by her. It was officially owned by one of Holmes's other girlfriends. But when Holmes came to Chicago in 1886, after having traveled around for a little while, he decided he wanted to go into business as a pharmacist. Went down to Springfield to take a pharmacy course, and as far as we know, that was the first time he started using the name H.H. Holmes, the summer of 1886. Now, having done that, having gotten through the pharmacy course somehow, he came back to Chicago and got a job in the offices of Mrs. Dr. Holton. Now, books about Holmes, modern ones, going back to at least Herbert Asbury, always tell this story the same way. They say that old Mrs. Holton was desperately in need of assistance because her poor husband, the actual pharmacist, was slowly dying of cancer upstairs, so she was only too happy to take on this young, energetic go-getter H.H. Holmes. Now, the trick with this is the story always goes that they disappeared shortly thereafter. Holmes declared that he was the owner of the place and that the Holtons had gone off to California, never to be seen again. But there was a period in the 1890s when neighbors were talking about Holmes having murdered anyone they hadn't seen in a couple of weeks. There were some stories of him working at Holton's pharmacy, but none of them having disappeared, so I got a little suspicious on this. Now, we knew from city directories that the doctor's name was E.S. Holton. That doesn't really tell us very much. There were lots of E.S. Holtons floating around in the world. But I finally found this national medical directory that listed every doctor in practice in the country and every pharmacist that finally told me what the E.S. stood for. Turned out that E.S. stood for Elizabeth Sarah. The doctor was a woman. What? It turns out Dr. Holton was not an old man at all. She was a young woman. She was only a couple of years older than Holmes. She had been at the University of Michigan about a year before he was there. So they probably had some mutual acquaintances. And they both survived well into the 20th century. They didn't disappear at all. Holmes did buy it outright, the drugstore from them. They did have a lot of trouble getting the money, but he actually did end up having to pay them. And right back there, that was the Jewish section at Oakwood Cemetery where we're doing a cleanup this October. But right across from that are the Holtons. Elizabeth Sarah, William, her husband who had some kind of job on the railway, was not a doctor dying of cancer. But there's me with a selfie at their graves. So that one he's off the hook for anyway. But it was really while he was working at that place that he discovered his great love, which was swindling. Now, this is a lawsuit from while he was working there. He had bought some barbershop equipment to set up a barbershop in that business, but he never paid for it. The lawsuit came about because the guy who had sold it tried to repossess it himself without going through the proper channels. But that was just one of them. It was only after a month or so of working there, early 1887, he bought the land across the street to build the building that we now call the Murder Castle. Once again, this is the architect's first floor diagram of it. He had hired a company called Etna Iron and Steel to do all of this, and of course he didn't pay them either, so there's a lot of paperwork on file about this. This lists all the people who were working on it, how much they were paid. The workers actually were paid, it was their bosses that were not. And eventually what they built would have looked like the first couple of floors of this. The third floor was a later addition, and up on top there, that's a cheap temporary roof from after he set fire to the place in August of 1893. But this ended up getting buried in mechanics liens, mortgages, swindles, schemes. Now, eventually, by 1893, usually when they sent out a summons, it would be a summons for one person. But when this place got buried in litigation, they would send out a summons to everybody with an interest in the place, which this is page 1 of 3. We've got, among the people with an interest, Julia Connor, who had died a couple of years before this came out. H. Holmes is on there himself. Thomas Bryan, the founder of Graceland Cemetery, whom Holmes had swindled. Lucy Belknap, that was his mother-in-law. John S. Belknap, his father-in-law. A couple of these people I couldn't quite trace. But that's page 1 of 3, and apparently this had happened a few times before, because up at the top where it says, "We command you to summon," you can see some poor weary clerk has written in the word, "again." It's one of my favorite things that I found in all of this stuff. So, that brings us through 1887 when the place was built. 1888 we're going to cover just briefly because I know there's always all these stories that Holmes was also Jack the Ripper, who attacked several women in late summer, early fall of 1888 in London. So October 9th of 1888, H. Holmes registered to vote here in Chicago. October 12th, they filed his answer to some of to Etna Iron and Steel, who was suing him. The architects and the builders had put in long depositions. He filed his answers to that in early October. It is also mentioned by his father in one newspaper article that he had come to visit them back in New Hampshire in late October of 1888. So that gets him a little closer to London, but, not close enough to stab anybody. But 1889, a guy moved into the castle building by the name of Ned Connor. He moved there along with his wife, Julia, and their daughter, Pearl. So they lived in the castle for a while. They had an apartment on the second floor right near the apartment where Holmes was living with Murda and their new baby Lucy. But Holmes started having an affair with Julia, which was well known to, I think, everybody except Murda. So Ned and Julia split up. Ned went off and lived someplace else. Holmes continued to try to wrap him into various swindles and schemes for a while, but then he carried on having an affair with Julia for about 2 years. Then on Christmas of 1891, Julia and Pearl were supposed to go to Davenport, Iowa to attend Julia's sister's wedding, and never showed up. Holmes started writing to people saying, "Hey, have you seen Julia around? She's left my employ, but she needs to sign some paperwork back here." He had hired her as a bookkeeper. Then he would go to Ned sometimes and say, "Hey, Ned, do you know where Julia and Pearl are?" And when he first did that, Ned said he was really annoyed at Holmes because he had been trying to get him into another swindle and scheme. So he said, "Yeah, I know exactly where they are, but I'm not going to tell you." And for a minute there, Holmes got really nervous. until Ned admitted that he didn't know where they were, at which point Holmes relaxed. So what had happened most likely was that Holmes had killed the both of them. Now, Holmes later on wrote quite a number of different confessions, but one thing he was fairly consistent on was saying that Julia died during an abortion. Most likely scenario is he got her pregnant, figured the easiest thing to do was get rid of her, so he pretended he was performing an abortion and then killed her. So Julia, the daughter, he probably would have killed with cyanide. There was also a story that he had killed Ned's sister, Gertrude, as well. She went back to Iowa after working for Holmes. About 6 weeks later, she died of heart failure. It's sometimes said that Holmes had poisoned her. Holmes was accused of killing her during his lifetime. The family had a doctor's note saying that it was heart failure, but they protested so much. Ned was so insistent. She died pure. She was never seduced by Holmes, that I almost do get a little bit suspicious. So after Julia and Pearl disappeared, a woman moved into the castle named Emmeline Sagrand. Now, we don't have a photograph of Emmeline Sagrand or of Julia, Pearl, or Ned. Some of these people I have pictures of, most of them we just have newspaper drawings. That's one of the interesting things about researching this, is it takes place right in this one little intersection of history, where newspapers have figured out how to do drawings cheaply and easily, but they're still a couple of years away from photos. If this had happened 10 years later, we would have pictures of everybody, we would have pictures of every room, we would have pictures of every piece of evidence. As it is, we mostly just have drawings like this that were probably based on photographs. So Emmeline was having an affair with somebody. She told a lot of her friends that she was engaged to this guy who lived on the south side, but she always gave him a different name, because she knew that he was actually married to somebody else. Apparently, she thought that Myrta, who lived up in Wilmette by now, was dying soon, and then they would get married. But she worked as his secretary for a while Holmes started up work on adding a third floor onto the building that was supposed to be a hotel for the World's Fair. Now, the way that he got away with this kind of scheme is that everybody in Chicago was expecting to get rich off of the World's Fair. So he typed up these letters saying things like, "This is to Bliss, Bullard, and Gormley, hardware dealers. Gentlemen, please deliver to H.H. Holmes Hardware for 701 and 703 63rd Street, and which I will guarantee the payment of as owner of the building. Yours truly, H.S. Campbell." There was no H.S. Campbell. That was just H.H. Holmes. Down below it says, "Should be delivered to H.H. Holmes, 701 63rd. That's Holmes' handwriting right there. I can recognize that pretty well at this point. The rest of it, I don't know who might have been scribbling on there. Well, that's the handwriting he made up for H.S. Campbell. And he got away with this over and over again. People would give him all kinds of stuff on credit because with the upcoming World's Fair, people were being way, way too free with their credit. But meanwhile, in 1893, as he was getting in trouble for this stuff, as he was getting caught by one supplier after another, he took up with another young woman by the name of Minnie Williams. We do have a photograph of her, but this drawing is frankly better than the photograph that goes around. She was a girl from down south. She and her sister and their brother had been orphaned at a very young age. They had grown up with a series of guardians, like different guardians. She had one guardian. Her sister Nanny was sent to live with an aunt in Louisiana. She didn't see her sister for years until they were grown up. By some accounts, she had forgotten she even had a sister until they were reunited at a judge's house. This is Nanny. Now, Minnie is a really strange case in the Holmes thing. There's a lot of different accounts of what she was like. She seems to have had a bit of a better idea of what was going on than some of the others. I think that her idea was that she thought that she was using Holmes to relaunch her acting career. She had studied elocution in Boston. She had tried to start up her own theatrical company, but then she blew through all of her money and told one of her guardians, "Well, I guess it's time I got a real job." And I always say there's a lesson here about giving up on your dreams, because as soon as she decided that, she got a job working for H.H. Holmes. Now, nothing about her story totally makes sense, and she ended up being a major player anyway. So she and Nanny both disappeared in July of 1893. And when Holmes was captured a while later, he had this whole lurid story saying, "Oh, well, Nanny is definitely dead, but Minnie killed her. I admit that I helped get rid of the body in Lake Michigan, but she got jealous that I was spending so much time with her sister, so she killed her with a stool, and now she's buried out in Lake Michigan, and Minnie is off in hiding someplace. And if you find any more dead bodies and it looks like I might have done it, Minnie did it, and she's trying to deflect attention away from her by making it look like I did it. Nobody bought that, but that was a story Holmes stuck to pretty well over the years, and she does seem to have had a bit of a better idea what was going on than other people. Not so much that he was killing people, but that he was swindling people. She was officially the owner of Murda's house up in Wilmette. So this brings us through spring of 1893, right when the fair was getting started. But also, we had already had this article saying hidden secret rooms. After that, any chance of him actually running it as a hotel were pretty much shot. So the third floor really was not exactly inhabitable anyways. It almost seems like he had just built a papier-mâché facade so he could tell all of the investors that, yes, I am in fact adding a third floor onto here for hotel purposes. He had figured out pretty early on that you could make a lot more money pretending to operate a hotel than you can by actually making one. So in August of 1893, right in the middle of the fair, that building the third floor caught fire. This weird thing that if you look at it on the top, that is a temporary roof that they had to put over the top of the thing. Now, this was right in the middle of the fair, and this is part of how we know it wasn't really a functioning hotel, is that when a World's Fair hotel caught fire, it made the news. When this place caught fire, it did not make the news one bit. Later on, when people told the story, they listed the people who were in the building at the time, and it was all known employees and long-term residents of the place. There doesn't seem to have been anybody just staying there for the fair at the time. So the insurance companies knew what had happened immediately. They didn't believe for 1 second that this was an accident. They knew that he was just trying to get the insurance money out of them. So Holmes started to get in trouble and decided it was time to get out of town. Somebody told him that you could only really be prosecuted for arson for 1 year. The statute of limitations was really short. So he decided to get out of town. First thing he did was marry his latest girlfriend. He had been seeing a woman by the name under the name Henry Howard by the name of Georgiana Yoke. Now, Georgiana knew that Henry Howard was not his real name. She said that she knew that he usually went by H.H. Holmes, but his story was that he had a rich uncle named Henry Mansfield Howard. And Henry Mansfield Howard had offered to make him his sole heir if he took on his name. So sometimes he went by the one, sometimes he went by the other. Georgiana's another one we do not have a photograph of that we can confirm. There's a lot of drawings of her. Of various quality. I'm not sure if this one is supposed to be her or Murda. Sometimes they would just say Mrs. H.H. Holmes in the papers, but wouldn't say who it was. And she ended up being a very important witness. She tried to hold on for months to the belief that her husband was maybe a swindler, but definitely not a murderer or anything like that. She found out he had other wives, still tried to believe that he wasn't a murderer, until they found the bodies, at which point she became a very important witness in the trial against him. And she's been the subject of a historical novel called A Competent Witness by Judith Nichols. I'll leave that up for a second while I take a sip. It's a novel, but it's actually very well researched, it's very well done. After it came out, I located a couple of letters written by Georgiana. It turned out that Judith had nailed her voice almost perfectly. So, when Holmes was traveling around, he took her first to Denver to pick up some money that Minnie Williams was owed for the death of her brother in a mining accident there a year before. Then he and Benjamin Peitzel, one of his usual swindling buddies, went down to Texas together. These guys had worked together off and on for 3 or 4 years by this point, and Holmes had this plan. He said, here's what we're going to do now, Ben. Now, you owe me. I got you out of jail for that check swindling thing over in Terre Haute. But here's what we're going to do now. We are going to go to Fidelity Mutual and get you a life insurance policy. Then, when that life insurance policy matures in a year, we're going to go to Philadelphia and fake your death. We'll find a dead body that looks like you, and we'll say that it was you. Then we'll take that $10,000 payout, move to South America, and live like kings. Damn hell-ass kings. Having worked with Holmes for a while, you really think the guy would have known better than this. But first thing they did after the business in Denver was they went down to Texas, where Minnie had owned some property that Holmes had a document saying had been transferred over to him for the sum of $1, where they built another building that looked very much like the castle back in Chicago, only bigger. And it was the same thing. They got a lot of stuff on credit. They got a lot of materials and workmen on credit, never actually paid for any of it. The whole thing was just one big insurance blind. And there is a diagram of the place. It was really bizarrely built on the inside, too. There's some people have suggested maybe he was planning to use this for all sorts of nefarious purposes, but he never really set foot inside of the place after it was done. Texas authorities were a little bit rougher than the Chicago ones at the time, and while he was down there, he had gotten involved in some horse swindles. That doesn't look good in Texas. He had to flee the state after a while. See, I think when he moved down to Texas, he decided he was going to become like a dime novel Wild West outlaw. He started calling himself Mr. Howard. That was Jesse James's old nickname. He had a whole story to his wife that they had to stay in town because his uncle had a ranch out here, and he had to use a whole different name here because if they thought his uncle was in town, the squatters on his ranch might kill him. But then he went up to St. Louis, tried to start another business like this, another fraudulent drugstore business, swindling people like Hennessy Cognac, got caught right away, ended up sharing a cell in jail with a guy by the name of Marion Hedgepeth. Now, he was a semi-famous bank robber at the time. A train robber is what he was. And I think Holmes was absolutely starstruck. I mean, he'd been, using Jesse James's old nickname. This guy had robbed the Glendale train, the same train that Jesse James had robbed. So Holmes was just starstruck and told him, hey, I've got this great plan. We're going to fake my friend's death in Philadelphia. If we get all the money, can we use some of it to get you out of jail? Then you can come to Europe with us? And Hedgepeth was like, yeah, we'll see. Holmes only did a few weeks in jail in St. Louis. Hedgepeth immediately informed the authorities, this guy's planning to fake his friend's death, and frankly, I think he's probably planning to murder him. And everyone said, yeah, right, Marion, you're just saying crap to get yourself out of jail. He would eventually get out of jail. He was shot to death in Chicago during a robbery one grim New Year's Eve several years later. But Holmes then went out to Philadelphia with Benjamin Peitzel, rented a house for Benjamin on Callowhill Street, and then instead of faking Benjamin's death, Holmes simply killed him. Killed him with chloroform poisoning, tried to make it look like an accident so when somebody found the body it would look like he just accidentally blew himself up in the upstairs room. He was buried in a shallow grave in a potter's cemetery under the name B.F. Perry. Holmes then wrote to the insurance company and said, hey, this B.F. Perry guy who died in Pennsylvania is really Benjamin Peitzel. You owe his widow $10,000. I'll come identify the body and pick it up. So that's what he did. He went there along with Ben's 14-year-old daughter, Alice. They identified the body, took the money. He swindled the widow out of most of it, then started traveling around with 3 of Benjamin's kids, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, their brother. So the insurance company did put 2 and 2 together. They used Marion Hedgepeth's thing about him faking the death. They used the long string of problems against this guy. Started tracking him around the country. Finally tracked him to Boston. The Boston people didn't want to act on a coroner's warrant, but they found out that he was wanted as a horse thief in Texas, so they arrested him as a horse thief. And Holmes said, there is no way I am going on trial in Texas as a horse thief. I bet this is really about the insurance fraud thing. Why don't we go back? Why don't you just send me to Philadelphia instead and I'll stand trial for insurance fraud? And so that's what they did. They sent him to Philadelphia, and he was what they call a 9-days wonder. For about a week and a half, he was on the front page of every paper as this master swindler who had faked his friend's death. And he said, oh yes, Benjamin's really alive. The reason those children aren't with me is they're off with their father in South America someplace. And once again, people remember, didn't this guy have a building in Chicago that was full of hidden rooms? And then they thought, nah. People kind of forgot about him until the spring of 1895, when he was put on trial. And he pleaded guilty to insurance fraud. He was found guilty, but then the DA brought him in and said, now listen, you've changed your story over the last few months. You said that was not Benjamin Peitzel's body at all, and you faked the whole thing. Now you say that it was him, but it was a suicide, and you just made it look like an accident so that you could get the insurance money. So this begs the question of where are the kids really? And Holmes said, oh, they're off with Minnie Williams, my old girlfriend in London. I bet we can contact her, or we put an ad in the New York Herald. Which makes a little more sense than you'd think. The New York Herald, the first column of every page, this was a terrible, terrible newspaper. They'd been a copperhead paper during the Civil War. The first column was always these weirdly coded advertisements like Amethyst, Letter at Old Place, Down below, Commodore, Kane expressed, elevation to show Wednesday, come then all will be forgiven. Or, Benny, once more, come home to mother, if not be responsible for what will happen. Stuff like this. So Holmes wrote out a letter to the district attorney, at the bottom of which was this secret code. And this covered all the things he should say. It's like, get in touch with Mr. Massey, that was her old guardian. Please contact George Graham. Tell everybody that you're still alive. So they did place the ad to Minnie Williams, her various aliases that Holmes said that she used. If you decoded this, it says get in touch with Mr. Massey and get in touch with George S. Graham, City Hall, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But nobody quite believed him. Of course, nobody responded to this ad. So a detective named Frank Geyer was put on the case, tracing Holmes's steps with the kids across the United States and across North America. Eventually found out the bodies of Alice and Nellie buried in a shallow grave in a cellar in Toronto. Holmes would later say that he put them in a trunk and turned on the gas, but it was actually a house that didn't have gas hookups. He probably just poisoned them. By the time the bodies were found, they weren't in any shape that that anybody would know for sure. So, once this was found, everybody knew that this guy was a murderer. He came right back into the news, and everybody started crowding around this building, where the DA in Philadelphia had gotten in touch with our new chief of police and said, investigate that building. So this is a drawing of it from the Chicago Mail, which was not a great newspaper, but they did have great pictures. That happens a lot. The real tabloids had the best pictures. Now, I just recently, in some really bad video about Holmes, I noticed this photograph that I somehow had not seen before, and this is a side view of the castle building with the crowd around it. If it's a fake, it's a really good fake. I can recognize the awnings, all of the features. You can see the temporary roof in the places where it was damaged by fire. This is a really cool shot. I have no idea how I didn't see that before, if it just came out of the archives or what. There is also, in the Chicago Chronicle, there was a drawing of the inside of the drugstore that Holmes operated on the first floor of the place. That's probably Holmes on the right behind the counter. It says on the man on the left is the murderer's much-wanted private secretary. That was a guy named Patrick Quinlan, who was more of a janitor, really. So, immediately, some Chicago papers put together their own maps. This one was in the Times-Herald. It's probably the most accurate diagram going of the place. I've seen people get tattoos of this since. I love it when they actually use this one, too. At least they're getting the accurate one. There's also other maps that look like this. But the problem is the investigation was run by Chief Badenoch, our new chief of police. 3 months before, he had been a flour and feed dealer. He had no experience as a cop, no legal training, nothing in forensics, nothing in the budding field of criminology, nothing that would really lend itself to experience as a chief of police. That was part of why he got the job. The new mayor liked the cut of his jib and made him chief of police. The idea was you've got to have somebody from outside of the police world because the police are so corrupt. That was the idea at the time. Nobody thought it was weird to give this job to somebody who had no idea what he was doing. But he just went around this place saying, wow, I've solved every murder of the last 10 years. Now, a couple of people who worked the case, Detective Sergeant John W. Norton. We found his grave on Find a Grave Friday recently. He stayed with the force for like 40 years after this. The same guy who investigated H.H. Holmes was also going after Al Capone 40-some-odd years later. Also, Inspector Fitzpatrick, we found his grave down at Mount Olivet Cemetery, right near Mrs. O'Leary. But they started digging around the place. They found some mysterious gas tanks, though they always just turned out to be full of regular heating gas. They found some stuff. They found the stoves and said, this must be where he was cremating the bodies. Until somebody pointed out that no, you couldn't possibly cremate a body in a wood-burning stove. You could try, but it would smell terrible, and you wouldn't actually reduce anybody down to ashes. There was also some really weird stories about a footprint found on the inside of a cellar door. Not a cellar door, it was a vault door. He did have this walk-in vault that he was fond of showing to the neighbors was soundproof. Like he would say, hey, why don't you go in there and scream so everybody can see that this place was soundproof? And they would do it, but nobody stopped to think, like, why would a guy want a soundproof vault? What's the industrial use of this? Now, whether there was really a footprint on the wall, it's really interesting comparing the different newspapers at the time. Some of them say, oh yes, we can totally make out the footprint. Others say we can see several footprints. And others would say, we've examined the door, but we don't see what anybody is looking at on this thing. Now, the thing was also installed like right before Holmes disappeared, so he couldn't have killed too many people in there. Well, there were two vaults. There was one on the 3rd floor, one on the 1st floor. But the Chicago Mail started putting out things like fiendish, dastard, and red stains on a rope. I love this headline. They start debunking themselves within the same headline. Red stains on a rope. Supposed bloody noose is found in H.H. Holmes' house in a dust-covered chest. The theory is that victims were hanged by the neck. Might be cochineal, die at that. Quantity of this coloring agent found in the premises. So after a few weeks of digging around here, they realized that the police had found some bones down in the basement, but they kept turning out not to be actual human bones. They couldn't really find anything that would back them up, and newspapers started putting out things like this article, laughing at the police. Plenty of talk, but no legal evidence in the Holmes case this far. General belief that in the future the police would do better to talk less. Also, it mentions the Arkansas Arabian Nights tale. There was this guy down in Arkansas who was claiming that he had been worked with Holmes over the years at the Castle building and had all kinds of stories about murders. Newspapers spilled barrels of ink on the guy until it turned out that he had been in jail at the time he said that he was working with Holmes, and the whole thing was total fiction. So right as the police were starting to become laughingstocks, there was an article called Bones in a Trunk. This guy showed up at the police station. They let the reporters talk to him just enough. And the newspapers went to press saying they've brought in a man named Charles Chappell. He is a machinist. He is a man who turns dead bodies into skeletons to sell to medical schools. This is what happened to all of the dead bodies. He sold them to Mr. Chappell, and Mr. Chappell sold them to medical schools. So this worked for about a day, but the next day the Chicago Tribune had to say, bone clue is weak. Now, it turned out the guy's name was not Charles Chappell, it was M.G. Chappell. And really, he had been a machinist years ago, but he had one body that he never quite finished, so he had taken the skull from the body and hung it in a tree in his yard. Neighbors must have just loved this guy. But one of the neighbors, in fact, got really interested in the Holmes case, called the police and said, there's a skull in my neighbor's yard. Do you think that might be a Holmes thing? And really, all of his skeletons were way too old to have been Holmes victims. But the newspapers found out that this guy would say anything they wanted if they poured enough whiskey down his throat. So they started trotting him out for a day saying, so here, we've solved all the mystery. Here's why we can't find the evidence. This guy bought it and sold it. After a day or two, it turned out that his story was, I think the Chicago Mail referred to it as the vaporings of a weak mind. So things were just wrapping up in Chicago after a couple of weeks when the New York World published this article. Now, the New York World did not have a reporter on the ground in Chicago. They had been to interview Holmes in his cell, but they were also known for making up any kind of sensationalistic gobbledygook that they felt like. So they published this article, The Castle of a Modern Bluebeard. It had the very famous diagram that is still republished all the time today. And then down at the bottom is a particularly important paragraph, a couple of paragraphs. There are hundreds of people who went to Chicago to see the fair and were never heard of again. The list of the missing when the fair closed was a long one, and in the greater number foul play was suspected. Did these visitors to the fair, strangers in Chicago, find their way to Holmes Castle? In answer to delusive advertisements sent by him, did he build close to the fairgrounds so as to gather in his victims wholesale? And after robbing him, did he dispose of their bodies in quicklime vats, in his mysterious oil tank with its death-dealing liquids? Or did he burn them in his elaborate retort with which the basement was provided? Now, this has been quoted verbatim in almost everything written about Holmes since. It was in Gem of the Prairie. It was in Devil in the White City. With these two paragraphs, they sort of set up the whole legend of Holmes. Being far from the action, they didn't realize that A, it wasn't really all that close to the World's Fair. It was on the right street, but way down the road. And also that it had never actually functioned as a hotel. They were just spitballing here. But this became the most important part of the legend of Holmes. So meanwhile, the place caught fire. The Chicago Tribune reprinted that article as an example of like, wow, look what they're saying about us in New York now. And apparently somebody read that and thought, well, not in my backyard, and set fire to the place in August of 1895. Now, it didn't actually wreck the entire building. It just wrecked the top couple of floors. They had to be rebuilt. But the building was still standing well into the 20th century. This is a picture of it from 1938 right here. The full version of it over on the left, you can see an automobile. There's a pickup truck parked over to the right of it. The building was finally torn down in 1939 to build the Englewood Post Office on a part of the site. Now, really, where the building would have stood is just to the left of the post office here. There was kind of where this grassy knoll is now and where those trees are. So we can actually line up a couple of different versions of the Sanborn fire insurance maps. You can see that there's a little bit of overlap between the two, just a tiny bit. So really, it would have been located like right about like this. And I have gotten to go into the basement of the Englewood Post Office a couple of times, usually with the History Channel. Here's me looking all tough down in this one tunnel that does go right into the footprint where the two of them would have overlapped. Now, I know a lot of people out there like ghost stories. I see people are already asking about this. So I was working for ghost tour companies at the time when I was down here. So there's a thing in the ghost hunting world called EVP where you hold up a microphone. If you watch the shows where they really ham it up, these are the guys going like, "Are there any spirits here who got a message for me?" So I did have an audio recorder on me, and really for lack of a better idea, I ended up sitting down there alone for a while and just started whispering the names of the people I think were most likely to have been killed in this place. Now, it may have been that he didn't kill anybody in this place, but among those that he might have would have been Emmeline Segrand, Julia Connor, Pearl Connor especially. So when I played I didn't hear anything while I was down there. When I played the recording back, there was a voice louder than my own that sounded like a little girl singing. So I'll play it here really quick. See if you guys can hear this. First there's me whispering, then there's like this voice. Creepy, huh? I'll let that go through one more time. Now, I can't really make out what the voice is saying. As I've always said, it sounds to me like she's saying, "Sorry, beefalo," which sounds like the worst Chef Boyardee product of all time. Other people have suggested something like, "Where did she go?" or "Why did she go?" So I'll play it one more time so you guys can hear it better than I can. Spooky. Now, I don't hold this up as like proof of the paranormal or anything. It's just something cool. But I always tell people there's no such thing as good ghost evidence. There's just cool ghost evidence. This is definitely cool anyway. Couple of months after the investigation wrapped up, Holmes's trial got underway. There's a really interesting side part in it that you can see that he's got this beard here. The prosecution kept calling it his prison beard. The defense tried to get them to change that and said, "Listen, why don't you, we would like you to request to call it the beard that he grew in prison. Calling it a prison beard paints him as a criminal to the jury." It was one of the better things his defense did. He was defended by a couple of people. One was a guy named William Shoemaker. And when I was working on the book, I loved writing the William Shoemaker scenes because if this was a novel, I couldn't have made up William Shoemaker. He was a 22-year-old kid, fresh out of law school, had only made the news for making a fool of himself in the past. But then one day he showed up at the prison and said, "A mysterious stranger with a long black beard appeared in my office late last night with a sack of money, saying he was retaining my services as a lawyer for H.H. Holmes." He broadly hinted that this stranger was former President Benjamin Harrison. Holmes couldn't be that picky at the time, so Shoemaker didn't have any idea what he was really getting himself into at the time. He ended up in way, way over his head. His partner was another young man, also at the same age, named Samuel Rotan. Rotan was a talented lawyer. He went on to become the district attorney himself. In this case, he was badly outspent and badly outclassed by the Commonwealth, plus he had the trouble of trying to defend H.H. Holmes in court. But he did about as good a job as you could. At one point during the proceedings, William Shoemaker came running in shouting, "Your Honor, we object!" The judge kind of looked at him and said, "You're up right now. Are you objecting to your own testimony?" And the day of the closing speeches, William Shoemaker was found passed out in a nearby drugstore. The defense did not enter a case at all. They decided that the prosecution had done such a bad job with proving that H.H. Holmes had killed Benjamin Pitezel that they didn't need to enter a case at all, which was probably the strongest hand that they had to play. Holmes was put on trial just for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel. The prosecution tried to bring up the murders of the kids as well, but the judge ruled that's some other jurisdiction. If he's found innocent here, he can go on trial for those someplace else. Which was a major victory for the defense. And the prosecution did definitely establish that Benjamin Pitezel probably did die by murder, not by suicide. But they didn't really do much to establish that Holmes had been the killer. And the jury later said, one of them even said, well, maybe they hadn't proved it, but we'd all heard the other stories about this guy. Which, if he'd had better lawyers and more money, he probably could have gotten another trial based on that, but it would have just been delaying the inevitable, really. They tried a few things to get a new trial. Nothing happened. He was found guilty pretty quickly and sentenced to be hanged. About a month before his execution, the New York World, that same paper, announced that Holmes was writing a confession in which he would claim to have killed 20 people, including his famous janitor Patrick Quinlan, who of course was still alive and well at the time. Now, they had been trying to pay Holmes to write a confession, but he was going with their competitors, so they just published this stuff that they completely made up. Problem is, once they had said that Holmes was going to confess to killing 20 people, he couldn't very well confess to killing fewer than that, or it wouldn't have been the story that the papers wanted. So, in the confession that he wrote simultaneously for the New York Journal and the Philadelphia Inquirer, he claimed that he had killed 27 people. Of these people, a number were actually still alive at the time. Others were fictional characters. Others were people he had really killed, but he completely changed the story of how he had done it. But it was really, as a piece of writing, it's about as boring as a confession of killing 27 people can possibly get. There's the famous line, "I was born with the devil in me," which isn't actually in it. It was in fake excerpts that were leaked by a rival paper. But I always loved this thing that was in the Journal the same day. Holmes' confession is not as startling in its effect, or at half as profitable to read as the great bargains offered in pianos and organs at the warehouse of Cunningham Piano Co. Sure makes me want to buy a piano. So about a month after this, he was hanged in Philadelphia. And there were a number of witnesses to this. There were about 100 people who witnessed the execution, which is fewer than you might have other times, but there were the prison officials, there was the jury as required by law, plus about 75 people who managed to get admission to it, including people like Frank Geyer, who knew Holmes pretty well and hated his guts. Holmes came out on the stand at the scaffold and said, "I take back all my confession. Really, I have only killed 2 people, just Julia Connor and Emmeline Segran, both of whom died during illegal operations." So he was hanged. There was some people have made a big deal about the fact that it took him about 15 minutes to die, but that was totally standard at the time. But the one unusual thing is he had been requested to be buried in a giant block of cement. He'd been getting a lot of different requests, like people who wanted to display his skeleton in sideshows. He didn't like that too much, so he decided to have Samuel Rotan ensure that he had a couple of barrels of cement poured into his coffin, which he actually went along with. It was kind of a trend at the time. So that was that. He was buried in a small cemetery in Philadelphia. A couple of years later, a story went around that said Holmes was not hanged. There was a guy going around, Robert Latimer, had gotten a hold of these letters, he said. And really what he had found was a book by a guy, a little pamphlet a guy had written called Hanged by Proxy, How H.H. Holmes Cheated the Gallows. It was written by a guy named L.W. Warner. Now, L.W. Warner was somebody that Holmes had confessed to having murdered. He, in fact, was alive and well and living in Newton, Iowa. But to cash in on his connection, he wrote this little pamphlet saying that wasn't Holmes at all. They got some other guy with a mustache and hanged him, and Holmes is now living in San Perinambo, South America with Minnie Williams. San Perinambo was not a real place. The way he described the hanging was not at all what went down. The story lasted about 1 day, was debunked immediately, but I told the History Channel about it 100 or so years later, and they managed to get a judge's permission to exhume the body based on those stories, so he was still down there in all of that cement. If you look closely there, you can see the top of the skull, and then they brought up the jaws down way below as though he were screaming. And here he is all cleaned up for a night on the town. And they did some DNA testing and found out that, as I told them, yes, it was in fact H.H. Holmes. They barely even needed to do the testing, though, because while he was in prison, he was examined by a doctor named Eugene Talbot. And Talbot, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, published like some drawings of his skull and also some casts of his teeth. And when they first showed pictures of the skull on TV, you could match up the jaw and see that he was missing all of the right teeth. He had all of the right teeth were bent out of shape. It was actually kind of cool being able to compare them. That medical report that he issued was mostly about the bumps and ridges on his skull. Phrenology was still a thing at the time. They thought they could tell a lot about you by the shape of your head. But there's one bit in Talbot's report that I always like to close with because I know I can't really top this. Bottom of that first full paragraph there. Sexual organs, unusually small. So one more piece of the puzzle. But all right, everybody, I will stick around to answer questions, of course. But first, I want to go ahead and plug the upcoming tours. Sunday morning, we're doing Art Deco Chicago, including a couple of buildings downtown where Holmes can be traced to the building that was there before they built the Art Deco one. This is a brand new tour that I'm putting together over the last couple of weeks, finding all kinds of cool stuff. And then a week from the day, Thursday, it's my second vaccine dose, the night that I might be knocked out. But I've been doing ghost tours for 15 years. I can probably do it in just about any condition. So next Thursday night will be a Ghosts of Chicago tour, Sunday Art Deco Chicago. If you want a Mysterious Chicago hoodie, sweatshirt, t-shirt, coffee mug, shot glass, flask, just go to cafepress.com/mysteriouschicago. You can be like these happy Georgia voters right here who have cashed in on these great deals at cafepress.com/mysteriouschicago. And with that, everybody, I will put the Benny Goodman music back on, and we will just hang out. I'll answer any questions that come up. And I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago. Thanks for joining me tonight. Oh yeah, tomorrow is Find a Grave Friday as well. The main question, what is his most likely confirmed body count? 9. There's 9 people that we can say with some degree of certainty he probably killed. There's also a couple of maybes after that. At the back of the book, there I got a whole appendix of his known victims, his possible victims, and his debunked victims. Thank you, Connie. Angie, no, I've never been to his grave. I wanted to be there when they dug him up. In fact, part of the reason I worked on that show was I thought they would let me come along when they dug him up. But then suddenly I get a text saying, oh yeah, we've been here for 3 days. Like, no! Thanks, Andrea. Zelle kind of doesn't work when we're doing the live streams. We get more than a couple going through at once. How many kids did he have? 2 that we know of. His daughter Lucy, who died in California in the 1940s or 50s, and his son Robert, who became the city manager of the city of Orlando. Find a Grave Kathleen is 10 o'clock Central over on the Facebook page. Lauren, I am drinking Jepson Single Barrel Bourbon. The Z31 barrel, that's my favorite one. It's maybe my favorite bourbon of all time. The first tasting note is toasted marshmallow, and I taste it. Holmes has a Disney connection? I don't know about that. I know that some people have done weird stuff with his genealogy. The cemetery was Holy Cross. There is no marker there. He's in a regular white coffin now. Yeah, I can't do... You can still use PayPal to donate on Eventbrite, where you buy a pay-what-you-want ticket for these things for which you don't actually need a ticket. But I can't do PayPal and Venmo right now. Now, if you're using PayPal to pay some other service, that's fine. Like Eventbrite or I think Facebook Pay. But I can't take direct payments from PayPal or Venmo anymore. Robert asked, did Holmes visit and tour the fair? We assume so. We assume so. There's a story about him and Nanny talking about the Ferris wheel the night before she disappeared. But other than that, there's really not a lot of data on him actually going there. But I assume he did. There's not a direct way on YouTube to donate. If you go to mysteriouschicago.com/donate, that'll give you lots of different options. How were they able to exhume him? I wasn't there, but with great difficulty. They got permission from a judge. They got a construction company, some archaeologists from the university. Oh yeah, Patreon you can pay with PayPal as well. Yeah, I haven't decided who we're going to for Find a Grave Friday. If you're new around here, Find a Grave Friday is the morning mini tours on Friday. We go to a cemetery where I know a particular person is buried, but I don't look up where in the cemetery it is or what the grave looks like. We figure that out in the comments, then we play hot and cold till I find it. And if I find it right away, like last week we went looking for Babyface Nelson and found him immediately. And so we went and looked and found the guy who wrote Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was in the same cemetery, so we found him too. My kid is going to be taking illustration in college. Do I ever speak with Jeff Mudgett? Yeah, I worked with Jeff Mudgett quite a bit. We worked on that same TV show together. We've been on panels together a few times. We always have a good time hanging out. We disagree historically, but we always get along fine. Is there anything that Holmes did that was positive? Probably. Living relatives in Chicago? No. The relatives that I know of are, I think they're mostly in Nevada.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about it.
How and did he kill women in his plays? The ones that he killed, we really don't know how he killed them. They never found a body of any of the adult victims for sure. Oh yeah, there is also a Facebook page called the Mysterious Chicago Regulars. It's where people can hang out after the tour, share pictures of their cats, and make up rules for the drinking game, etc. Oh, everybody, Aiden is going to Columbia College here in Chicago. And I am jealous of him. I myself went to a small school in Georgia where I got, since you asked, an English degree. Maria, if you have questions about Patreon payments, it's probably you have to go through Patreon itself. I missed a question about Devil in the White City up there, I think. How did Devil in the White City get written as nonfiction? I think it was just a marketing thing, personally. Having written both fiction and nonfiction, I will say nonfiction is so much easier to market. And yeah, so I've interviewed his great-great-grandson, but that's about the only relative I've interviewed. And unless they've got a stack of his letters or something, family members are rarely a good interview subject. Grace, I wouldn't say he fabricated Devil in the White City. The thing about the gas chambers went around earlier than that. He didn't make it up. But it was mostly not. But a lot of the stuff that he was using was just like tabloids and pulps. I'll find Miles in a minute. So we got a lot of questions. Most interesting thing I found out about H.H. Holmes, besides his unusually small sexual organs, one of my favorite stories is when he was a medical student in Vermont before he went to Michigan. He was living in a boarding house and beat up his roommate because the roommate borrowed his mustache wax without permission. I love that. You know, you don't... He borrowed his mustache back. You don't tug on Superman's cape, you don't spit in the wind, and you don't borrow H.H. Holmes' mustache wax. Do I think a movie will come of his story? Last I heard, the Scorsese and DiCaprio plan was they were going to do it as a Hulu series. A couple of years ago, I was at the same Bob Dylan concert in New York as those guys, but I failed to chase them down the street like, I've got notes! Yeah, I had a lot of friends go to here in Chicago who went to Columbia. I would have loved to go to Columbia myself. My whole goal in college was just finish up so I can move to Chicago. Robert, no, I am drinking bourbon. What the heck did all those women find attractive about him? That I really don't know. Joe, I would say that the whole selling skeleton things was probably a complete myth. Not just overblown, but probably a complete myth. Now, when he was in New Hampshire, when he was a kid, he worked with Dr. Nahum White, studied under Nahum White, who was a vocal advocate of human dissection. By the time he got to medical school, the practice of stealing bodies was not as common as it had been a decade or so before, but there were a lot of rumors that he and Professor Herdman were engaged in stuff like that. But that was stealing bodies, not selling them to schools. But really, there's not a lot of good evidence that he actually got involved in that stuff. I don't know if it was his eyes either. His eyes were messed up. He suffered from strabismus, which is a scientific way of saying what we would normally call cross-eyed. One of it was his left eye was kind of messed up. But Georgiana, his last wife, also had a condition with her eyes. She had like a goiter that made it look like her eyes were bugging out. So they might have bonded over that. Marcy, I don't do ghost tours too much anymore, except around October, but I will be doing a virtual one on a week from today. John, I don't know if anybody's living in the house in New Hampshire right now. Probably there are. I would say Georgiana was fairly worldly. She had worked as a teacher in Indiana. Then she worked at a couple of department stores in Chicago. So she'd been around. What happened to the terrible police officer? After another mayor took over, he was out of a job, went back to flower and feed business. Just kind of disappeared into history. Felicity, yeah, it should still be on YouTube afterwards. After about 10 minutes after I'm done, things get posted. Robin, send me an email. There's actually a Graceland burial search that you can do on their website. So you should be able to find the Krugs without too much trouble. But yeah, Phoenix, I'd say he was a masterful bullshit artist. And partly because even now there's study after study saying that when people see somebody with strabismus, even as a kid, they are inclined not to trust them. And over, I think I opened just about every chapter of the book with a quote from some neighbor of his or some old friend saying, I knew you couldn't trust that guy because he would never look you right in the eye. Even as a kid, he would have had to learn to be very, very persuasive. Jim, I'm not sure exactly when the Texas castle got torn down. It was, they called it the Rusk Street Fire Trap for a few years. It sat empty for a while. Businesses eventually moved in and renovated. And then it was gone. Marcy, yeah, if you can find my Adam Seltzer profile, you can Facebook pay through that. Yeah, I can't take Facebook pay through the business page. It's just the way they've got it set up. But yeah, Jim, sometime around the 1920s or so, it got torn down. And I have mild strabismus myself. I didn't even know until the eye doctor told me a couple of years ago. I was like, yeah, I do see double quite a bit at night. I can correct for it, though. It's not that bad. Hobbs, I don't normally sell autographed versions of the books. I used to do raffles, but that's why I can't do PayPal or Venmo anymore, because they thought that I did a thing where every donation got you entered into a raffle for a copy of the book. They thought that was a gambling operation. Barbara, he was signing MD after his name. He was technically a doctor. He did graduate from the University of Michigan. Not with flying colors or anything, but he did count. Isn't the basement of the post office part of the original building? No. There's a little bit of overlap between the two spaces, but they're not. It's not the same basement or anything. Grace, yeah, they should all be on Kindle. The excavating the new Obama library. That might in fact unearth some fair items. That'd be pretty cool. Be cool if they did. Let's say when they excavated the for the ice skating rink out on Midway Plaisance, they found the foundations for the old Ferris wheel. The one in Indianapolis, out in Irvington, there's like a house that's on the same property of where they found the body of Howard Peitzel. It's not the same original house, I don't think. I haven't been there, but there's a cool coffee shop in Irvington that I was at one time. I can't remember the name of it for the life of me, but it's full of skeletons and stuff, which is perfect. Yeah, Rachel, that ice skating rink is exactly where the Ferris wheel was. Thanks, Marcy. Kathy, World's Fair souvenirs are generally not particularly valuable. They'll sell for a few bucks on eBay, but they're abundant. Ava, yeah, just about everything should be on Kindle too. Can I hold up the bourbon bottle? Sure. Jepson's single barrel, straight bourbon whiskey single barrel. About the only place you can get these is Benny's around Chicago, while supplies last. Jepson's is best known for Malort, which is famously disgusting. But Jepson's bourbon is delicious, and the single barrel stuff is arguably the best bargain in the bourbon world right now. Good night, Marty. Hey, Lynn, congrats. I'll find Miles in a second. Robert, I do have the hat. But I don't know, when I try to do stuff in character or in costume, it starts looking stupid after about 5 minutes. But yeah, let me go find Miles. He's probably not far. Miles.
Here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation at the beginning of his program. Let's dance.
Well, here's the guy himself.
We have been presenting the music of Benny Goodman and his orchestra from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel on Michigan Avenue.
Now, Robert, I don't keep the papers. I don't have any of this guy's stuff. I mean, in the legal archives, I've held a lot of stuff in his handwriting, but I don't want it in my house. Here we go. Here we go, Miles. Here. Mm-hmm. Is that everybody, Miles? I got to rewind to Benny Goodman.
Presenting Benny Goodman.
Miles is chill except when he's not. He does get rambunctious, don't you, Miles? No, I did not see that Eli got a dog.
With all my heart.
What? Miles is a big boy, yeah. Now, Kristen, I don't need any of H.H. Holmes' stuff in my house. I'm a memorabilia guy, but no good could come of having any of Holmes' stuff in my house. I never thought of Eli as a dog person, so that's a surprise. Mysterious Chicago baseball cap on Cafe Press. I'll see what I can do. I don't know how good their baseball caps are. Kathleen Miles is 2. And he's still on the desk over here. I haven't seen a picture of Eli's dog yet myself. Well, I will see if Eli wants to come on Whiskey and a Cookie tomorrow night. You know, Elliot on Whiskey and a Cookie works for the Anti-Cruelty Society, so be a good chance to talk about rescue animals. Miles himself was a rescue. He is from Paws in Chicago, so was Charlotte for that matter.
Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of...
We went to pause and Miles climbed right into Aiden's hoodie. I'm like, okay, that's our cat. Do Miles and Charlotte like to knock things off of tables? Charlotte more than Miles. Miles does knock things off tables, but he doesn't try to. It just happens. Robin, I don't know what a Ronin S DJI is personally, but that would be fantastic. Send me an email if you can. It's Adam at MysteriousChicago.com. Oh. See you tomorrow, Bob. Miles is still in the chair next to me right here. Come on, Miles. Come say hi to all the nice people. Now, my old cat, who we had before Miles, I got from a shelter down in Georgia when I was in college. Their shelter was they were doing the best they can, but it was a trailer. And he was sharing a cage with like 3 other cats. And they told us initially, I warn you, he does not like belly rubs. Took him back to the house we were renting. He ran around like, okay, this room's mine, this room's mine, this room's mine. And he just kind of flopped down like, all right, you can pet my belly now. A painting of that cat was part of Aiden's portfolio to get into college. He got into every school he applied to. And he lived to be 18, that guy. Yeah, Miles. You get your hair all over me. It's all in my mouth. Oh. Whoa. Okay. You're too big to stand on my shoulder these days, Miles. Back when you were a kitten, sure. Oh dear. Oh dear. Miles? That's like my new boa? Whoa. Okay, Miles, okay. You do not fit on my shoulder anymore and you need your claws trimmed. Now, Charlotte's a little more shy. She doesn't seem to like the spotlight quite as much as Miles does. When there's new people over, when we could do that, and soon again, Charlotte would just kind of run and hide. But like the very first week we had Miles, my parents came to visit, the people upstairs came down, and Miles just kind of like sat on the windowsill like, yep, I'm hanging out with everybody. Have a good night, Bridget. Congrats on shot 2. Hey, Zap, congrats. Well, hey, Miles, welcome back. You just can't get enough, huh? Once I get him off of the bed, I kind of owe it to him to be as cuddly as possible, I guess. Whoa. You can see him climbing up me here. See, I set this up next to my desk. I moved the chair over here. Now Miles has a nice, easy place to sit on the chair. See, Miles? You stand up for me? Ah, good boy. Good stand. I got his hair all over my nose. Thanks, Susan. The regulars page, just search Mysterious Chicago Regulars. Thanks, Karen. Kristen, I'm glad somebody got a good grade off of my research. Tracy, there are lots of different tip options and donations on mysteriouschicago.com/donate if you don't have the Cash App here. Thanks, Debbie. You can see Miles is now messing with the laptop. Miles. Miles. Okay, Miles, you're gonna flop down right there? Alright, buddy. Yeah, he's helping. Thanks, Danielle. He's trying to help me get a better angle. I've already got it set up so I'm looking slightly up, so I'm not like... You don't see my double chin. Yeah, Miles is all about the film school angles. He'd totally have the thing set up in the fireplace if he could. Good night, Danielle. And Vicky.
In the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Kathy, good luck with that. Ronnie gets her shot in less than a week. I get my second one in about a week. But hence the reason we're doing the Ghost Tour next week. That's the tour I think I can do in any condition. I'll probably have to pick an easy one for next Sunday, too. But I haven't decided yet. Now, Megler, I will probably do a version of the Ghost Tour on the effing Chicago page at some point. And for that one, I will be boozy and swearing freely. Thank you for coming, Amy. Any mob ghosts? A handful, not as many as you'd probably think. Laura, yeah, I'm the oldest. And Jennifer, I did put a thing in the event description saying, hey, there is a chance I won't be able to handle this. But hey, you know, I haven't missed a day of doing a tour in a year now, over a year now. And Mike, who I co-wrote the silent film book with, said the second dose of Pfizer just kicked his ass. And then the next day he was fine. Another friend of mine said the first dose he was fine, second dose he was sick for 36 hours, then he felt like he could rip up a phone book. I can't start doing reruns now. I don't know how to air a rerun exactly. I think I can do it. It's just a trick. And right at the time when I've had to revamp all of the funding stuff, it's not the time to be taking a day off. Thanks, Gina. Now, I'm trying to remember tonight I think I remembered to extend the time. Like right before the Holmes tour, I made it look like it went from 8 to 11. So you can still buy a ticket to this tour now. Obviously, you don't need a ticket to watch these things, but there's like a donate what you want for tickets option. And if you do it ahead of time, that also means that you get a reminder email. Susan, yeah, Mom has finished up with my land of the pictures. Kathleen, if it's been a message lately, I might not have seen it yet. Right before I start broadcasting, I turn this thing off. I turn the emails off. I do wonder if the cold that I had the last 2 weeks might have been amplified by like side effects from my first dose. Because the cold I got hit me pretty hard and lingered for longer than a normal cold. Well, 2 weeks, it's not terrible for a cold. But Aiden and Ronnie got the same cold, but it didn't hit them nearly as hard.
Presents On the Alamo.
Left phone number, Disney employee. Now, 2 weeks is not unusual for a cold. I was still able to work every day of it. But it's also, I got chronic sinus infection, etc. And of course, the allergies are still bad. Jordana, congrats. Just let us know how you're doing tomorrow night on a whiskey and a cookie. Oh yeah, I'll make sure to have some soup ready to go. I had to go stock up on some chicken stock. And good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are. Do I ever do neti pots? Yeah, I do. I do neti pots. They don't do that much good for me. They help a little. Hobbs, whiskey and a cookie. Probably a good time to plug the upcoming stuff. So, let me take this down. So, on Fridays at 6:30, we do a show on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page called Whiskey and a Cookie. That is where Patty and friends, including myself, drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week. So probably a good time to go ahead and plug the upcoming stuff again. So, Sunday morning is going to be Art Deco Chicago, a brand new tour that I've been filming over the course of the last week. A week from today, day of my second Pfizer dose. The tour I can do in probably any condition, Ghosts of Chicago. I used to do 300 ghost tours a year. Sometimes I'm pretty sure I actually did do them in my sleep without anybody noticing. We, of course, over on the Facebook page, we do mini tours every single morning, except for Sunday when they're full length, including Mural Monday on Mondays, and tomorrow will be Find a Grave Friday. So lots of cool stuff coming up. Thanks a lot to everybody who has swung by tonight, especially hello to all of the new people. Once again, go to mysteriouschicago.com/donate to look for the new tipping options now that PayPal and Venmo have cut me off. But everybody, once again, I hope to see you all tomorrow for Find a Grave Friday. Hope to see you all on Sunday morning for Art Deco Chicago. Until then, I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago saying stay safe, stay strong, and of course, stay spooky. Have a good night.